Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Met. My name is David Breslin. I'm the Leonard A. Lauder Curator in charge of the Department of Modern Contemporary Art here. And so thrilled to see everyone on this rainy afternoon. What better place could we be, particularly to celebrate this great talk, these two fantastic individuals, Denise Murrell and Lorraine O'Grady. So I am introducing the beginning part of this talk to really pass this over to Denise later. But I'm setting this up by saying that this is a conversation taking place on the occasion of Manet Degas. Manet Degas was curated by Stefan Wollahosian, the John Pope Hennessy Curator in charge, the Department of European Paintings, and Ashley Dunn, who's here, Associate Curator, Department of Drawings and Prints. Denise and Miss O'Grady will discuss the histories of some of the subjects who appear in Manet's paintings, notably Laure in Olympia and Jeanne Duval, and how the latter story, in particular, has resonated within Miss O'Grady's practice and also within her personal life. Before passing it over to Denise, who will introduce Miss O'Grady, I would like to share a few acknowledgements. We extend our thanks to Alice Carey Brown and W.L. Lyons Brown, the Sherman Fairchild Foundation, and Harry Lind Fath for their lead support, as well as the Janice H. Levin Fund and Gail and Parker Gilbert Fund, the Sam and Janet Saltz Trust, and Rosalind and Kenneth Landis for their additional gifts. So on to Denise. Denise is the inaugural Merrill H. and James S. Tisch Curator at Large Office of the Director here at the museum. I think as most of the people here in the room know, she curated the important exhibition, Posing Modernity, the Black Model from Manet and Matisse to Today, at Columbia University's Wallach Art Gallery, where Mr. Grady's work was featured, and was also the co-curator of the exhibition's expansion at the Musée d'Orsay as Le Modèle Noir de Géricault à Matisse, and that was in 2019. Currently, I know that Denise is fully preparing for the groundbreaking exhibition that opens on February 25th, Harlem Renaissance and Transatlantic Modernism. Amazingly, and thanks to Denise, this is the first museum survey of the subject in New York City since 1987. And I think very importantly, the exhibition will establish the Harlem Renaissance and its radically new development of the modern Black subject as central to the development of international modern art. So without further ado, I'm really pleased to introduce Denise. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, David, for that very gracious introduction, and welcome, everybody. Very good to see you here this afternoon. I wanted to introduce Lorraine by mentioning that she was born in Boston to a middle-class family of Jamaican immigrants. She graduated from Wellesley College with a degree in economics and a minor in Spanish literature. She then spent over 25 years in a career that began with working as a research economist in an elite program of the U.S. the U.S. Department of Labor in D.C. She then shifted to becoming a teacher and then a translator of Spanish literature. She eventually owned a company with multiple employees that translated from all languages needed by her primary clients, Playboy and these Encyclopedia Britannica, and these were Lorraine's selections for me to mention. In 1974, she began teaching French literature at the School of Visual Arts in New York. A brilliant, multifaceted, and highly successful career as an economist, a translator, scholar that even included a 2-year stint at the prestigious Iowa Writers' Workshop in fiction writing. Join me in welcoming Lorraine O'Grady.
Well, I'm getting started now. Can you hear me? Okay, great. I'm running this slideshow by myself, so I may be looking down a little bit, but I'm thinking of you. Okay. I'm not going to start it for just a second. I just want to explain that it's like there are about 110 slides or so, and I'm going to begin at the beginning of my career, which is the first thing that I did publicly was Mademoiselle Bourgeoise Noire, and this was in June of 1980, and then 4 months later, this was the first performance of Mademoiselle Bourgeoise Noire was at just above Midtown Gallery in Tribeca, which was a black gallery, and so it was sort of speaking to the faithful, you know. But I borrowed a poem from Léon Dama, who was somebody I had been reading about when I was studying the Negritude movement in Paris, and there were several people there in Paris at that time who had all gone to school together. Mainly the French people from all over the islands in the Caribbean, from Guadeloupe, Martinique, and Guyana, and places like that, had all gone to the same school, which was the Lycée Schelsche, I believe. And they were of a type, but somehow or the other I gravitated more to Léon Dama because he was similar to myself. He was sort of like a class trader. He hated the black bourgeoisie, and so one of his poems in particular was a good one to borrow from that point of view. And the punchline of the poem I supplied, which was, "Black art must take more risks." Unfortunately, it was my first performance. I really didn't really know what I was doing necessarily or how to do it. And I did not, I just assumed that there would be photographers there. Well, there was just one photographer from the Soho Weekly News, and he took a photo that was totally incomprehending of what was going on, and I've never been able to use it. And in fact, I think I deposited it at my archive, and I don't even have a copy of it, you know. So Denise had wanted me to show images of my very first performance at Just Above Midtown, but I don't have any images. So what I'm doing is I'm going to pretend, and I'm going to show you the next time that I did it, the performance. The next time was a year later, and it was when I invaded the new museum. And this was not a friendly invasion, okay? So the punchline, I did my own poem, and the punchline of that one was, "Now is the time for an invasion," right? Okay. So, I'm just setting this up by way of saying that when I did it at Just Above Midtown, I thought that I might never have another friend left, you know. But it turned out that Linda Good Bryant, who was the founder director of Just Above Midtown, when I finished and I was just standing there, I didn't know what to do. She just rushed up to me and she just said, "That was the best thing I've ever seen," right? Okay. And then a month and a half later, she called me. I was in San Francisco for the summer. She called me and she said, can you represent the gallery in a performance series that we're going to give at the gallery for the downtown art spaces, and it's going to be called The Dialogues. There was going to be an exhibition plus a performance series around the topic of dialogues. And I said, wow, that's really great. And I'm sure she was shocked because the next performance, which I did for the dialogues presentation, was Nefertiti Devonia Evangeline. And so right from the get-go, I would say that my career took the form of a diptych, because there was always, the work is always both political and personal, or personal and political. But there's always within each body of work an emphasis. So I would say that half of the work is emphasizes self-exploration, and the other half of it emphasizes cultural critique. So what you're going to watch here as I go through this is that there's this back and forth between the two impulses, and they don't necessarily go alternate exactly, but sometimes there'll be one strain and then the other one will just pop back up again, okay? Okay, so Mademoiselle Bourgeois itself is, it was the very first piece I did. It was a performance, not anything on the walls. But I consider it my first diptych. And the reason that I consider it my first diptych is because of the particular range of emotions that was required in order to perform it. In other words, I had to be able to go from joy to anger. And you'll see that happening in the course of the performance as I do the slides. But that's why I consider it a diptych. And here we go. We're going to get started now. And that's obviously my friend. Her name is Ellen Rosen, and she's helping me get dressed. Huh? Oh, there you are. Happy to see you, Ellen. Okay, so now I've entered the new museum, which was at that time in the New School. This was, what, 30 years ago? 40 years ago? And she's up. Sorry. It's going to take me a little bit to get the hang of this. Keep your eye on the bouquet. She's giving away flowers. She enters and she's smiling and she says, "Won't you help me lighten my heavy bouquet?" She gets a big smile on her face. And this goes on for a while. But she's gotten rid of the bouquet, the flowers, and you can see what's left. What's left is a whip made out of sailing rope. It's not macrame, it's sailing rope. And I beat myself with it. And I beat myself. And this time, I would say I had remembered to bring my own photographers with me. That's why there's a complete collection of photos. It was very ably photographed by Corinne Simpson and Salima Ali. And still, I managed to forget to do something. I forgot to say what was the particular moment that they had better make sure they photographed, right? So it didn't get photographed. The key moment was the moment when I throw down the whip and then start to shout out the poem. No record of that. But this is how it goes. You learn as you go. Now she's shouting out her poem, or about to shout out her poem. This image, this image was the bane of my existence. this was the only image that was available in public for almost 25 years. And so the memory of the performance got reduced to this, one image of me shouting. And it was so not representative of the whole performance, but yet it was something, this image of this crazy woman, screaming, was who everybody thought I was for all that period of time. So it's taken 15 years for me to basically establish the complexity of the performance and the complexity of my own persona as an artist and so forth. It's been a long, hard road to get out from under that image. I just want to pause this on this photo because this is 1981, and it was taken at the last restaurant that Mickey Ruskin, who was the great restaurateur of the art world in the the mid-60s to the early 80s. He's the one who owned and really established Max's Kansas City, and then the Ocean Club downtown. And this was his last venture. It was somehow I don't know, it was called Chinese Chance or something, but nobody ever remembered the name of it. They just remembered the location, which was One University Place, which was just around the corner from the new museum. And that's in the lower right is David Hammons, and at my cast, I had a cast of people that were acting in the performance with me that I haven't got all pictures of, but that's Richard Degas, my beloved Richard, who's no longer with us, and George Mingo, who's no longer with us. But these are the people that were really helping me with the performance, and I just want to say thank you, and Iris, rest well. So, okay, let me just keep going here. So now it is 2007. In other words, the performance was done in 1981, and the process of recuperation didn't begin until 2007. It's a long time to wait. And this first image is the one that got it started big time, which was that Connie Butler, who was the curator of what was then and still is, I think, the most important of the feminist art shows, WAC. Okay, thank you. It was a brilliant show, and I can't tell you how grateful I am that she made Mademoiselle Bourgeois the entry point to the show, so that you couldn't get in to see anything until you had passed by Mademoiselle Bourgeois. And so that was a really wonderful help and push for my career. Okay, let me. These are just more installation shots, I think, of different places. I had selected, Karine and Salima had given me maybe 37 images, black and white images, and I took 14 of them and made that installation that you see on the wall. Now, this is the work that I did in. Wait a minute. What? This is the body of work that I had mentioned that I did for Just Above Midtown, for the dialogue show, Nefertiti, Devonia Evangeline. And I'm sure that everybody at Just Above Midtown was in a state of shock because this had nothing to do with the energy of Mademoiselle Bourgeois. It was a totally ruminative piece that had 65 diptychs projected behind me as I was being the priestess, you know, who was doing the opening of the mouth ceremony. It was about trying to reconcile my relationship with my sister who had died before we had become reconciled. And the opening of the mouth ceremony is, I open your mouth for you, I open your two eyes for you, you are protected and you shall not die. But of course I couldn't, that's not real, do you understand? She was dead. She wasn't coming back to life. And we're not going to get reconciled except in my mind and my heart after having done this, okay? But once again, you're a victim sometimes of the accidents of the camera. I had hired somebody to take photos, but something happened to her camera. And of the full roll that she had taken, only 6 images were able to be saved. And so these 6 images are all the documentation I have of Nefertiti, Devonia Evangeline. But you can see that behind me as the priestess, that's the first diptych of Candace and Makataten when they were about 3 years old. Candace is the daughter of Nefertiti and of Devonia and Devonia Evangeline, and Makataten is the daughter of Nefertiti. But I call this documentation performance ruins. These are the performance ruins, all that was left. Candace and Makataten again. And this is me performing the opening of the mouth ceremony for Nefertiti, and now I'm performing it for Devonia. One of the main things about this performance was in some ways it sort of mimics the ruins of this, because there was a voiceover narration talking about these two families, but everything that and I was the priestess, but the voiceover was telling me what to do, what actions to take. And no matter what action I did, it was the opposite of what the voiceover narration was telling me to do. So the whole thing was completely out of sync. And finally, in the last image, the voiceover is telling the priestess to mount and straddle the tubs. And there's no way I can do that. And so the piece ends with, you know, of my foot hitting the ground. And that's it for the 65 diptychs that were projected behind Nefertiti, Devonia Evangeline. Okay. So here we are. The next piece that I did was in the invasion of the new museum had happened in 1982. So this is 1981, I'm sorry. So the next thing that Mademoiselle Bourgeois did was not to appear as herself. she and I had a sort of understanding that the business of shouting out poems wasn't going to do it, right? And so I decided to give that up, and then Mademoiselle Bourgeois became an impresario. And the first thing that she did was a group show at a black-owned space called Kincallaba Gallery in the East Village. And the idea was that there would be 28 artists, 14 of them black and 14 of them white. Because this was 1982, I'm sorry, and no black artist that I knew had received a studio visit for the Whitney Biennial. That's how bad it was, okay. And the idea that we were so excluded, there was no conversation, but sort of on the street, there was more dialogue among the artists themselves, the black artists and the white artists, than there were among black curators and white curators, or black organizations and white organizations. Okay, so there was a bit of conversation, but I had never seen a conversation between an equal number of blacks and whites. And I wanted to see myself what that would look like. What would that conversation look like on the wall? And that was, so this show was my attempt to prove that. I had, Kincallaba was on East 2nd Street, which was the biggest of the open air heroin markets. And so I had asked John Beckner, who was a rather large figure in the Bronx, who did murals, to do something on East 2nd Street that would unite the outside with the inside. And he did this image, which became representative of the East Village art scene, although nobody ever gave him, me, or Kincallaba any credit for it. It was just this sort of like piece that was on the wall, but nobody knew how it got there. And because it stayed up for about 5 years at least after the show. And it was very well preserved and taken care of by the heroin dealers and the heroin addicts. You know, they guarded it, you know, they kept it in as good shape as they could. So there would often be flowers and so forth around it. And here is the main gallery, and you can see that there is, of course, well, you can see Keith Haring. He had been a student of mine, and so he was the first person to commit to the show, and that kind of let everything else happen. And beside him is Jack Whitten, and over here is Gerald Jackson. So there was this conversation between black and white. Whoop, how did that happen? Wow, thank you. I'm getting carried away. Whoa. And my jewelry's flying. And sometimes the rooms, there were about 5 different rooms, but they weren't always. This is, of course, Nancy Spiro, and on one wall, and Mark Eisenberg on another wall. And this is the card that was sent out for the black and white show, and everybody's lined up on either side. This is another room where I was trying to make the point that, you know, even though they were using the same materials for totally different purposes, but if you looked in the room, it would look as if they were identical. They were both made by the same person. But the one on the right is by Jeanne Duval, who was a famous French Fluxus artist, and the one on the left is oh my goodness, I'm having a senior moment and I can't remember his name, but I'm going to get back to it in a minute. But his piece, the Jeanne Duval has a loop, and as you went down and looked at yourself in the mirror that was below, the oils from your forehead were making a permanent design on the paper. That was the purpose. Okay. Here, the purpose is quite different. I mean, we all know the famous story of all of the, black and white toilets, black and white restrooms in the South, and there's a field of razor blades on the South, and that piece of paper has a handwritten quote from Faulkner, I think Absalom, and it says, between the white man and the land is interposed the figure of the black man. Okay. Here's another intervention by Mademoiselle Bourgeois that I don't have to really say too much about. I'll just let the slides run. This is the piece called Art Is, done in 1983. I should say that I had hired a couple of my friends to take photos, but then I had also sort of gone up to anybody that I could see taking photographs and asked them, to let me look at their photos after the event, and I had in the end. Some of them just gave me rolls of film to develop because they didn't want to be bothered. You take these photographs very enthusiastically, and then you have to pay to get them developed. And some of them just didn't want to pay to get them developed, so they're happy to give the rolls to me. That was nice. But I had something like about 400 slides when I finished. Somebody gave me, black and white prints, but I never used those. I just deposited them in my archive. But I had these 400 slides, and I took maybe 250 of them and got rid of the other 150 because they were redundant or they weren't good images or whatever. And I just destroyed them, put them down the chute. And so of the 250 slides that I had, I took 39 39 horizontals and 1 vertical, right, to make the slideshow, to make the insulation. I just want to say that the purpose of the 3 Mademoiselle Bourgeois events were the Mademoiselle Bourgeois performance itself was about critiquing the situation of total segregation. This is what the situation is. The second one, which was the black and white show, was to answer the question, who should the artist be? This is who the artist should be. And the third one, which was the intervention in the African American Day Parade in Harlem, was this is who the audience should be. But this is who is part of the audience. So there were 3 different questions being answered in the 3 different performances. Well, now, in Body as the Ground of My Experience, as I said, there was this fate of cultural critique, and now we go back to self-exploration. Okay, this is the personal stuff. This is Body as the Ground of My Experience, and the idea of these is that, well, it was all about, well, let me just show you the pictures, why not? This is what I call a collapsed diptych, and in it, the African woman's body is the ground, and out of her navel is growing the palm tree trunk, and above the palm tree trunk is the fir tree. So it's an obviously autobiographical conceit, okay? And it's just called the fir palm. This one is called Lilith Sends Out the Destroyers. The African woman is, this one is called From Africa to Jamaica to Boston in 200 years. And this is Dracula and the Artist. There's a lot of Dracula in my work. A certain kind of attitude towards sex, right? As I say, it's a little bit iffy. So I did Body as the Ground of My Experience in 1981. And I would say that it wasn't until I had a one-person show at the Intar Gallery, which was in the theater district, a very important Hispanic art space. And it was curated by Judith Wilson. And I would say that with Body as the Ground of My Experience, that was the first time that I really understood what I was doing. It can sometimes take you a while to figure your work out, And when I understood that what I was doing was making diptychs to advance a a feeling that I had had, which I would say was really becoming an obsession, which was the idea of the both and. And so I wrote an article in that was first, it was in After Image in 1992, and then 2 years later I wrote a postscript for it, and it was a complete theorization of the both and. But while I was writing it and researching it, I had seen images of Olympia, but there were these black and white images where you couldn't even see the features, let alone the expression. And it wasn't until the end, I was almost at the end of the writing, that I saw T.J. Clark's painting of modern life, which had a very good color image and for the time, and I could see the expressions. And I said, I can't deal with this. Because when I saw it, I saw a look that I had seen on my mother's face and on the face of my aunts, and how they changed when they were around white people, but particularly white people that they worked for. And that was a face that was designed to occlude any hint of interiority, any face that was designed to make them as unthreatening as possible, and as unknown as possible. They would adopt a face that, it was more than just the face. They would never go to work. They told me that they would never go to work in their best clothes. They would never go to work looking sexy. They would never do anything to alienate or threaten or frighten or in any way make themselves the source of attention, either of the white women that they worked for, or the white men that they worked for, or the white teenage boys that they worked for. This was their way of getting through, to occlude themselves. And I saw that look on Laure, and I said, I can't, I have to write Olympia's Maid. If I ever stop, this will be a whole other story. And so I've never dealt with Laure, and it's too late now. So I won't be going back, right? But I certainly appreciate those who are going there. Okay. And now I have to I'm almost at Flowers of Evil and Good, and I have like 5 minutes. I can talk about it. I'm so sorry, I've missed. Oh no. This is, okay, we'll just let this run through. This is the slideshow for a Miscegenated Family album, which now I've done Olympia's Maid, which is a totally political piece. Now I'm back to the self-exploration piece. This is the installation that I made out of the image. I took 16 of the images that had been in Nefertiti, Devonia, Evangeline, 16 of the 65, and I made this wall installation, a novel. I call it a novel in space. It's about the sisters you're born with and the sisters you choose. Only in this case, we didn't choose each other. I'm the younger sister of Devonia, and Nejmet is the younger sister of Nefertiti. We're what's left to get on as best we can with each other. The sisters have been chosen, and so we have to become sisters. I thought it was really funny that even the husbands looked alike. Akhenaten, Nefertiti was married to Akhenaten, the Sun King, and that's Eddie, Devonia's husband. And this is Devonia and Nefertiti when they were very young, 22, 23 years old. This is the only diptych that I made for Miscegenated Family album that had not been in Nefertiti Devonia Evangeline. It's the last image that we have of Nefertiti, and she's looking across this distance at Devonia's youngest daughter, Kimberly, and she has that. I was at the age where women start looking at younger women. Not because they want to have them, but because they want to be them. I don't know if there's anybody here old enough to know what that's about, but. And this is sibling rivalry, and actually the piece actually starts with a picture of Nefertiti and her sister Netjmet, which. This is called hero worship, and the Nefertiti and Netjmet image is called sibling rivalry. So the piece goes between sibling rivalry and hero worship. I'm going to skip through these. Okay. This is Studies for Powers of Evil and Good, which is why I was invited to talk to you, which was about Baudelaire and Jeanne Duval and my mother, and the three of them. This is a pen and ink drawing of Jeanne Duval by Charles Baudelaire, and she was his common law wife for 20 years. They lived together for 20 years, and she'd been so maligned by critics that I wanted to save her somehow, and so I started working on this piece. But then I realized that what I was really not trying, I was using her to get to my mother, because my mother was 70 years younger than she was, but they had really both moved from the islands to the metropole, and not that much changed in those days. Okay, and so the first here's a diptych that I did called. So people told me that they didn't know whether to look at this or read it. And I kind of thought that was a good situation to be in, okay, to not know which to do. But I had written, what I want, it's only these two pieces that have the text on them, and I'll just read them for you. On the right-hand side of the red diptych is lines from a poem by Baudelaire, and I'll read that. First I'll read the background text, and then I'll read the foreground text or caption. her belly, her breasts, those grapes on my vine, more cajoling than angels of evil, moved forward, disturbed my soul from its sleeping retreat, tumbling it from the rock crystal throne where calm and alone it was seated. Tumbling my soul from the rock crystal throne. On the left is Jeanne. The place not what I expect. It lonely and cold. Windows fixed, courtyard shut, doors squint. If I could, I would go home, stretch out my hair like a bridge and go across the abyss. Stretch out my hair like the abyss, like a bridge. And then another mood is this one. Here on the right, I prefer to opium, to wine, to aperitifs, the elixir of your mouth, where love dances the pavan. And when, by caravan, my desire sets out for you, your eyes are the well where my boredom drinks. Your eyes, the well my boredom drinks. On the left, they said, he'll use you. I said, nothing happened unless you take a chance in this world. When he touched me, my skin feel like it's scraped by stars. He scraped my skin with stars. And you notice that she's always dressed very primly, with its, with the Buster Brown collar and little tie at the neck. Respectability, politics, as they say. Always very trim. Then I discovered that I needed to replace her. Let me just make sure that I haven't. So far, we haven't gotten yet to the piece that Baudelaire did that Nadar did of Baudelaire, have we yet? No. Okay, so I have realized that I had to supplement the few images that I had of Jeanne by Baudelaire. First of all, because they were drawings, and they were not as, how could they compete against, photographs by the greatest photographers of the age, right? So I had to have people that had been photographed. And I also felt that I needed other images, and the images that I needed were of my mother and my aunts. Now, which one is it that is the Denise? Are you seeing the image yet? Have you seen the image?
This looks like this is your aunt here.
Wait a minute. Let me just let me go back here.
Your mother.
It's here. It's here somewhere. I know I've used it, but I can't. I don't know. It must be in one of these group photos, huh?
Is this one your mother?
Huh?
This looks like your mother.
The previous one?
Yes. So perhaps that's your aunt.
No, it's I think it's in one of these walls, is what I think. At any rate, I have used an image. I have used an image that's been painted by Manet of the same image of the same photograph by Nadar. Is it this one on the right? This one. I think it's this one. Let me just go forward. Sorry. Is it this one? Which one?
It looks to me, this woman at lower right, second from
Okay. Okay. Well, the mystery. The mystery. There's always it's a good thing there's mystery in the world, right? Okay. And I don't know if I've made it clear, but the main thing that I got basically in working on Baudelaire and Jeanne was the gift of my mother. I had felt that I knew Jeanne better than I knew my mother. In fact, I did, because in spite of the fact that Baudelaire wrote about her from the outside and so forth, and had many mixed emotions about her, he wrote about his emotions so honestly, and so that you could actually see who she was. And so I felt that in his poetry, I learned more, I understood Jeanne more than I understood my mother. And so it wasn't until I made the decision to give Jeanne my mother's voice that I was able to make this connection, that somehow I was able to take Jeanne and understand my mother. And so the next image represents that completely for me, which is this one. My mother on the left, Jeanne on the right. And I think you can go if you want to go. You want to go? And this is it in this one, if you'll see it over there in the corner. It's in this, as you all know, this wonderful show that was done by Denise Murrell at the Wallet Gallery at Columbia. And the picture, the large picture on the wall, is a Matisse painting one of the models for his illustration of Baudelaire's poems. Okay. However, when you get to the Manet painting of Jeanne, what you're seeing is Jeanne at the end of her life. Manet had lost track of her. Nobody had seen her, and then suddenly somebody, and he was planning to make a painting of her, but from his memory. And then one day somebody saw the real Jeanne, and she was limping across and on crutches, and in this image, she has this huge bouffant skirt, which is really all about covering the fact that her leg is completely paralyzed. Okay, and you know, she's lost her. You can see that she's lost her teeth, and she did not live much more than a year after this painting was made, I think. Okay. So that's sort of the end of my part of that. But I just want to show I just have to show one more thing. Oh, goodness, oh dear. Okay, I hope you're sticking with me. This is my last work. and it is my new persona, the new Mademoiselle Bourgeois Noire, who is totally about me and the exploration of me, and not at all about politics, or at least not as much about politics as the first one was. And I basically I wanted an image that gave me more options. And so when you have a trunk and a head foliage, obviously what happens is that in the anthropomorphization of this, the trunk becomes the body, and the fur is the head. So therefore, you have the Caribbean as the body, and New England as the head. And I decided I needed the opposite, an image that would be the opposite. So the armor is late Renaissance armor from the time of the conquistadors, and I combined it with a Caribbean headdress. Sometimes help comes from the Caribbean, and sometimes it comes from New England. You know, you never know. And sometimes you're getting in trouble from one or the other. You don't know which one is causing the problem. So this is the last images. For those of you who are still with me, and everybody is still with me. I hope that the Met doesn't get upset. Are you upset? I'm sorry. We're almost there. Okay, this is the way that it was installed at the Brooklyn Museum in my retrospective. This is a piece that I did in 2020, so it was first shown in the retrospective, and it was, of course, in the European galleries, and so it was. Everything had to fit into that space, and it was disrupted, as far as I was concerned, by the Rodin images. And I'm going to have a show in April, and it's finally going to look the way I intended it to look. This persona's name is the Knight, or Lancelot Palm and Steel. And her presentation and her outfit is basically feminine, but she's always addressed as Sir. The Knight is never a dame. And here I am looking at the suit of armor that I based the bottom part on at the Chicago Art Institute. And then I did a film called Greetings and Theses, which was based on a performance at the Brooklyn Museum that had to be done behind closed doors. It was the middle of COVID, so it was a performance without an audience. And the theses are overlaid on parts of the There you go. That's it.
Can I ask you to be seated for another couple of minutes? We can speak for a few minutes.
Huh?
Can I ask you, could we have even just...
Could you go upstairs?
Okay. I'm thinking that, first of all, I want to say that I think this has just been such a revelation to hear you talk about your career trajectory in your own words, and rather than reading the various curators who've written about you and so forth. And if I can just make a couple of comments, I know that we're a little bit past time now, and various ones of us, including you, have to move on to other commitments. But the idea of both and, it struck me that when you were talking about Jeanne Duval and seeing, looking at her as a way, as a mode of self-exploration, finding yourself, finding your family history, finding your mother, in some ways through the words of Baudelaire. And then you're looking at Laure of Olympia as a mode of cultural critique, okay? You said at the very beginning that the whole idea of the diptych was the combination of self-exploration and cultural critique.
Both, yes.
So I think of your work, is it reasonable for us to think of your work with Manet? And these are both paintings that can be seen upstairs in the galleries right now, both the portrait, and everyone goes to look at Olympia. But I really encourage you to go around the corner and look at that portrait of Jeanne Duval. Far more work, your own work with Jeanne Duval has been far more extensive in terms of visual representation than that seminal essay that you wrote about Laure. So the question I pose for you is, as those of us who are following your footsteps tend to evoke and continue your work, this idea of the diptych, looking at these images, not as a singular image in some, self-described by the art establishment masterpiece, i.e. Olympia, but thinking about these personae, Jeanne Duval and Laure, as two women of color who coexisted in the same time, in the same space, and trying to balance the attention that we give between the two of them, so that we bring Jeanne Duval and her family, her history, more to the fore. Is that a legitimate way to build on what you have already so powerfully set out for us?
I think that I think that familiarity. I think that familiarity brings not resolution, but the willingness to live with difference. And so I think that it's possible to speak about people interchangeably, metaphorically. Mm-hmm. We do that all the time when we read literature, but we need to start doing it with life.
Yes.
We need to start being able to see each other as the same and different simultaneously. Mm-hmm. See each other more metaphorically.
Yes, yes. Yeah. So I think that practice of looking at these multiple personae, rather than following the history of focusing on just one painting, just one image, is what in the end can open up new narratives and establish new histories around the work of Manet. Whether he intended to or not, he has given us two images, through which we can establish a presence, a Black presence in that world of Manet and the Impressionists, and just continue to build on that rather than having those voices, that presence be silenced or obliterated.
I'm starting, as you know, to look more for people like me. So I'm finding really interesting Black people who were very well educated. You understand? Mm-hmm. And who chose instead of going home, they stayed in Paris.
Yes.
Those people interest me a lot.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And there is much up interest about them. I think the more that we learn, the more that we want to know, and the more we can understand.
I think we're just at the start of the research.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you're going to take it. You're going to go.
And we've got some other younger generation of scholars in the room here who are working on their own projects and building from there. And then I think the very last thing I'll do is we're pushing on 20 past 3 now. When you talk about your night, again, I'm just thinking, looping back to where you started with Mademoiselle, Bourgeoisie, performance, representing ideas, values, cultural values through performance. And there was you didn't quite mention the fact that the night that the Met was instrumental to your construction of your new persona.
Oh, yeah, I actually I didn't have it. I don't have a picture of the helmet, but the helmet is in the Met's collection.
Okay, okay. Yeah. So you were building
I adapted it, of course.
Okay, you won't
very good.
See
it just the way it looks.
Very good. Okay, all right. Well, I think what we should do is wrap here, and I think Lorraine has a few more minutes with us before she has to move on. I know a number of people wanted to speak with her, but to thank everyone for coming out and for your attention to this riveting presentation, and to thank Lorraine for giving us her time and her thoughts and insights on this material that we're all going to be working with into perpetuity.
Thank you.
Thank you.